hurt your figuring out capacity to know how to keep your little MKHs forward in the meeting. We've got, last time we had a meeting with you, if you remember, we said when you get through digesting that, we'll have some little further explanation for you about what the Spirit is. And we want to discuss that with you. But I feel like T agrees that we ought to review just a little bit on the soul and the vehicle and see if you know what the conscious mind is. I'd like to ask if somebody can tell us what the conscious mind is made up of. Who's going to answer that? Anthony?
Well, since you said the brain wasn't the computer, then could the brain be more related to the conscious mind?
Well, the little bit of spirit that we've been able to get into our vehicle is partially building up, is part of our conscious mind. And the other part of our conscious mind is the impulses that are being sent from our soul.
That's true. But Dan Soto said something that confused me when we said the brain wasn't your computer.
So the computer wasn't the brain.
Yes, but you don't want to, just because we said that, you don't want to, the genetic structure, which is the computer, which is the soul, which is the inner mind, uses the brain in order to trigger its signals. Okay? Now, and when it triggers signals, those signals come into your conscious mind to try to get you to respond. Okay? Now, in the same way that when you touch something, your finger triggers. When you touch something that's hot with your finger, the nervous system triggers to your brain, and you think, uh-oh, hot, remove hand. Well, in the same way, the genetic structure triggers human impulses according to the particular individual genetic structure of that individual. And then when it triggers those impulses, that comes into the conscious mind to try to get you to do what the soul wants you to do. Okay? Now, but what else is in the conscious mind? Kadoti said that something else was what?
Some of your spirit that you've gotten into your vehicle is also...
What do you mean that you've gotten into your vehicle?
Well, we don't have all of our mind into our vehicles. They're all of our spirit, but there's enough there that...
But what do you mean by spirit into your vehicle?
Well, spirit is what we've been calling next level mind or higher mind.
Yes, but you're not answering the question of what do you mean when you say getting it into our vehicle?
Using that pocket that exists that it can occupy so that eventually get all three of them.
Well, now you're guessing. Now you're relating back to previous things that we have said, and the last time we met with you, in getting soul and realizing that soul was the inner mind and the subconscious and the genetic structure, that is the soul, then the pocket disappeared. In other words, excuse me, this is why we're meeting with you, to help you clarify what the Spirit is and where it is and what it uses. Okay, the Spirit, it's true that the Spirit is that which came from the next level. And it came, but the best we can explain it to you is to have you think of it as not having shape, as it came from the next level, not having good, clear shape. And as that mind is with you, and as we increase the size of that mind with next level ways and thinking and procedure, you are building what we'll call a spiritual body. Okay? Now, boy, that opens all kinds of doors for the Lucifer's interpretation of spiritual body. Let's say that spiritual body or the body for the spirit. Well, it's a spiritual body, but we've got to be careful that you don't think of it.
Body for the spirit.
Yes. Well, and it's like the spirit taking form. It's like the spirit taking shape and form and density. Okay? Now, if the spirit, which did not have form, didn't have a defined form, more like a blob, okay, and let's say that now it's taking shape and it's taking form. Now, if you remember when you first got a statement about human individual metamorphosis, we talked about this even though our sights were slightly distorted, because we can see now that how the spirit takes form is in a sense a metamorphic process. Now, let's say that every time you do an action that is not right, or you do an action, or you don't do an action that you should be doing, and it requires some correction, you let off, as you receive correction, or as you become aware that you did not do what was proper, as your teachers bring it to your attention, or you recognize it even yourself, you feel something happen. And you counter that with the positive that we have taught you. In other words, your spirit counters everything of the soul, and the end result is shape and density and form for the spirit. In other words, the spiritual body is born. When Jesus said to his disciples now, and we can understand more what he was talking about, we were still so brainwashed to the human interpretations of that we thought he must have been off base. But when he said, well, you were born of water, but you've got to be born of spirit. And what we realized was that there was an actual birth taking place. There was an actual gestation period and an actual birth taking place, and the birth was the formation of a spiritual body. Now, the only way it's formed is by negative impulses of the soul, countered by positive impulses of the spirit, or your conscious next level mind, and every time they balance and you override with the positive, then another degree of formation is made in the gestation period. Every time you have a negative impulse or negative feeling, negative thought, whether it's from the soul or from an encounter or from correction in a lesson, and it causes anything, a downer, anything that you could term negative, it's like a chemical. And then you counter that chemical and with another chemical which overrides it. And the two then together form solidity, shape, body. So there's actually a body being formed. Now, so you have no reason from this moment on, if you're understanding this properly, you have no reason to ever be sorry for the fact that you have to deal with negatives, because they are an absolute necessary ingredient of forming the vehicle. Now, what if you...
Let me add something
okay.
before you get off. But that doesn't mean you wallow in the negative. You
No.
have to counteract it
That's
with
what
the positive.
Right.
Did I interrupt?
No, that's okay. Now, if I do what T just mentioned, if I waller in the negative, and waller even to a degree of it threatening, what happens?
The form
I'm losing the form. I can even abort. I can stop the process. I can even cause an abortion by not completing the gestation period to the point of its maturity. Do you follow that? In other words, if I let negative thoughts come in and they start to mount and they begin to overtake me because I don't get control and turn them into positives and get back where I belong and ready for the next step, then I have not only stopped the process, I have become destructive to the process, and I can even abort the potential fetus. I can either kill its possibility.
But you don't kill your spirit.
That wouldn't kill the spirit. It would mean the spirit has not taken form.
It has to go through this again.
That's right. It would mean the spirit has ruined its possibility. You can't kill, in other words, even like in the facsimile, even in the human world, when that fetus dies, that doesn't mean that anything has happened except that the formation of what would occupy the soul or the genetic structure of the offspring of those two individuals. Can you see that? And that will go ahead and happen when another vehicle is formed. And whatever is still dominant in their genetic structure combined would end up as the soul that would occupy the next fetus. And if it completed its gestation, then it can function as an individual for that period of time. And that's the way it's a copy. Even though you've got to still realize that humans, in a sense, well, not even in a sense, that humans by themselves have no spirit, but they have soul. And so Lucifer would even have you think that the soul is the spirit. And he would, even all the religions would have, because he's using them too, would have you think that the soul is the spirit. We'll have soul travel, we'll go to Ek. We'll have our souls all prepared to resurrect. We'll do all these things to get the soul. Now, you understand that the soul is the composite of what has been passed down, and whatever that composite is, and it's completely connected to the vehicle. Even though it can go a distance from the vehicle when the vehicle is in an unconscious condition. But it is completely connected to the vehicle as long as the vehicle is alive. And all that it triggers is all that is seen through the vehicle in other humans, or in humans, not yourselves, but all that is seen is emanations of the soul. Desires of the soul manifest through the vehicle. And that makes them build buildings, worship gods, be mean, whatever they are. So that ultimately you see that any malformed vehicle or soul is a genetic structure that has gone so rotten that it can't function properly in society, either physically or mentally, because such an accumulation or the genes have broken down for various reasons and accumulated so that the product is one that has no place. Now, you don't care that much about that, but that's just so that you understand it, because what you care about is yours. Okay, now, your spirit, your next level mind has come in and has associated with a soul and that soul's vehicle. And let's take Jesus' disciples. Their strength of gestation was this lengthy period that it took them to do what we talked about the other day, to go ahead and bravely preach what they had been taught to preach and be hated and be jailed and even be martyred in order to build that. And the next level very carefully saw that it took them a long time in order for the gestation to be proper under those circumstances. But they didn't all happen at the same time. They weren't all crucified or martyred at the same time. Now, yours is an entirely different experiment, but the same end result. Two teachers come and use totally different methods of having your spirit in combat with the negative of the souls and the soul's vehicles. And in the process of constant overriding of the negative with the positive, building your next level shape, building the form and shape. Now, that doesn't mean that that the end result is going to be etheric. Do you understand?
Butter is etheric when it comes out of the milk.
It will not be the same composition as the vehicle that you have. Now, we do feel that when that is completed, you will shed your vehicle. You will shed the shell of the vehicle, just as the caterpillar has shed his shell. Now, we even try to get you to keep that shell as intact and as healthy, so that every little section and part of this body that you're building will have a healthy building process. And in other words, you can't say, well, if my vehicle is breaking down and since it's going to become a shell, then I don't need to worry about it. I'm sorry, and you do need to work against that as much as possible. Let's take Granddaughter's vehicle, since she's listening to this tape, and she's had so much difficulty with her vehicle. It offers her exactly the same thing it offers anyone else. In other words, her vehicle itself is used as an instrument of all of these negatives. And as she counters those negatives in attitude and determination and not giving into it, but overriding it, the next level body, or the body for the spirit, or the spiritual body, is being built. This is what in the New Testament they call a glorified body. Even though Jesus had to hang on to his shell for a period of time in order to whet the appetite of his students. I mean, even probably went into a spacecraft and they said, wait a minute, we can let this shell hang together just long enough for you to impress your students that they must go through with what they've gone through with. In other words, his spiritual body would not need to have wounds inside or holes in hands, but there was also no need for any of his disciples in their spiritual body to stay. Once you're born, then it's time to come out into the household that you're born into. Now, this does not mean that we believe that any of you will drop your bodies. It means that you'll probably have them skinned off, to use a crude term, in the spacecraft.
Well, I think that they'll probably just fall away like a turtle or a crab loses their shell. You know, it's not.
But you don't believe here?
No, not here. No, I think it'd be on the spacecraft. But one thing I wanted to add before I forget it, and that is, when you're asking for lessons, you're asking for that negative fume or ingredient to begin to come into your vehicle so that your spirit can come in and counteract it. In other words, like us, for instance, as soon as we get a lesson over to you, then we go and begin immediately on bringing more in. And in the process, you all might be doing everything wrong, so that we come out and we start talking to you about procedure and seeing the negative, but then we counteract it with the positive by giving you procedure.
But you have to counter it with the positive.
And then in return, we act as a stimulus for your negative side to come out, so that your spirit can come in and counteract that negative. You see how?
Every time you suffer, every time you think, I can't do anything right, and come right in on top of that with, yes, I can, and a new determination, then you have completed that chemical reaction. Well, in other words, anytime you could label, anytime you feel something negative, then label that, aha, this is that ingredient that is necessary to this change. Now I must add the other ingredient, and that is countering it with such a positive that I do not let that negative be destructive to me. But it's that moment of suffering that is the solidifying, that is the process of form and shape and strength of building your body.
In other words, another thing to add to this is that, let's say that you are suffering from sensuality and you give into it, then you lose something that you could have gained from. In other words, if you had a weakness like that, then if you gave into it, then you didn't gain at all from that. So that means that next time the ingredient will be twice as strong, and you want to rise above it and not give into it. Now let's take something.
Or before you go any further, anytime you're tempted, anytime you're tempted by impulses of the soul, which would be physical and human type responses, anytime you're tempted in that way, that's a necessary chemical for you to apply another one to, that the overriding of it forms a third chemical, which is forming your body.
Well, let's say you have something that you think isn't very significant. Let's say you have trouble with tiredness or weakness or sleepiness or something like this. Every time you get into it, if it isn't the right time that you're supposed to be tired or be sleepy, or, well, there's never a time to be weak, but anytime you get into any of those things, then you are missing out on an ingredient, and therefore you have gained only weakness in that area, and you need to always counteract it with a positive, with your spirit.
We want you to all have good shape, okay? We want you to be nice and solid and strong with good shape. And you can, in a sense, you're being deformed anytime a weakness is permitted to continue, and you're not countering it with a degree of positive to override it.
Let's say that you aren't able to grow a good spiritual body because you don't counteract it with a positive, and you have become more negative, or more, not negative in the sense that you're negative, but that you had given into, let's say, what we said the other day. You kept saying to yourself, I can't do anything right. Let's say you keep saying that to yourself. That's giving in to the negative. Now, you will not have a body born. I mean, they can't make it complete in the next level any more than a doctor can make a little baby's body complete if it isn't completely born. Now, this is why it just disturbs me so when somebody drops a remark like that of, I can't do anything right, or I only do 73% of the things. That's all negative. And allowing thoughts like that to come in is not doing anything but destruction to your body.
Very destructive.
And so therefore you want to stop it immediately and try to counteract it with some thought that is a positive statement, because at this time we feel like our bodies are just about ready, and but we don't know about yours, but we also hope that we can all eat at the same time. And if so, that means that while we are seeing more and more of the things that you do, even though we don't want to see them, and we keep coming on and probably push you all to where you feel like you're going out the door. You see what I'm saying? Which nothing would happen if you did go out the door, other than you wouldn't get a body, but your minds would still go. Now, but you don't want to do that. You don't want to waste all this time, so don't even think in that.
No, you don't want to
As far
abort.
as we know, everybody's working okay, we hope, unless unconsciously, without letting things know about it, you are harboring thoughts that are sort of destructive to yourself.
What makes your shape out of whack?
But you still have time. As long as you have these vehicles, you still have time to get them in shape. So don't think about, oh goodness, I thought twice today, I can't do anything wrong. Those 2 times doesn't matter if you can.
Don't worry
if you
about
can get
that.
rid of that feeling. If you still have that feeling inside, then that means you have to immediately get rid of it. And as soon as you get rid of it, then you will have counteracted it with a positive. Now, it doesn't mean just dismiss it from your mind. What you want to do is reason, like saying, but I do a lot of things right. This is the only time I was told that I did something wrong. So I can't very well say that everything I do is wrong. You see what I'm saying? So you want to use your reasoning mind and try to get rid of the feeling of that negative feeling. So as soon as it goes away, then you will have accomplished what you were supposed to have accomplished.
This should help you be a lot more objective, because when you actually feel that feeling of hurt or of anger or whatever the negative is, or of a thought that's emanated from your soul that would have you indulge in a human sensation of any sort, then you should recognize that, aha, I'm having an expulsion of a chemical that I now have to apply a chemical to the degree that it is countered. Not even, in other words, your positive always has to be a little more than the negative in order to prepare for the next one. You can't just balance it out. You have to match it plus a little on each time you have a negative or experience that moment of suffering. Now, this doesn't mean that we think that the size of your shape will equal necessarily the inches of your physical body. It may be considerably smaller. Who knows how tall it would be. But this does mean that we do not believe this process could be completed in a spacecraft. That it has to be done any more than when it's out of the womb, the birth process could continue. Do you follow that? You can't take the fetus out of the womb and have the birth process continue.
They came through artificial means.
Well, no, I don't mean like a premature. I'm talking about
a baby that isn't viable.
Yes, that isn't viable. That's what I'm talking. Because what you've got to be, is viable, and it might be that some will have a little bit more formation than others. We don't know, like how many would go at a time, because you'd all be a slightly different state. But the important point, like T said, is you must be viable, because this cannot happen on the spacecraft. You have to have reached the viable point at departure.
And the reason for that, the reason we know that is that why would we be sitting here if it can be done in a spacecraft? So it has to be done here with the ingredients on this garden and what the soul has to deal with.
Well, you wouldn't even be in a circumstance where the planets, the atmosphere, the vibrations of this garden would trigger all those impulses of the negatives in order to keep that process going. And so, in other words, you in a spacecraft or a lab or off this planet, it would be a protected environment, and the process couldn't continue in that way. In the same sense, if there are some of your classmates who have aborted by not completing, then you can see that they will not have bodies. And now you can see why we said they still have to go back. Their minds will still have to go back. They will have to get their bodies at another time. Can you, did I speak out of turn to bring that up?
I think
You might as well understand that they will have to get their bodies at
you
another
all
time.
will be way
But their
ahead.
next level mind will have to return. And so you look puzzled.
Well,
You were supposed to be the turner of the
Yeah.
mind.
the next level mind,
The spirit.
the spirit, doesn't it have some form to begin with that it can
It
hear
has more like a blob, more like a. It isn't as dense. It hasn't become something else. It's.
Well, we may not have told them this. In a sense, we have mentioned this, that there are no souls born off this garden, right? Because there's no evolution on this garden.
Mm-hmm.
But on other gardens where they're created gardens, then the souls that graduate from that garden do
the
not have
spirits.
vehicles.
Yes.
They're probably
Which
a
we would
garden
call
of spirits.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where the end result is a spirit, which is...
Or if they had vehicles to go through at the point of their completion, they would be in spirit form.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would have to take birth. They would have to have a body for that vehicle.
We mentioned this, but I don't know if it was clear enough in that last tape. Did you all do
Now,
this?
I don't know why you're still puzzled. CT has clarified that this is not an evolutionary garden.
Right.
But let's take an evolutionary garden that is an evolutionary garden.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever vehicles that were occupied on the way up, if you're going to get a permanent next level vehicle, at the time you have completed the evolutionary process of that planet, then you will have to go get a next level evolutionary vehicle. And you all, in a sense, this may be
what we're doing.
Yes, this is what you're doing. But that doesn't mean you didn't come from the next level, because you have completed the evolutionary process of an
You
evolutionary
have to
garden.
be a member of the next level.
And
in order to be
your
able
next
to do
level
it.
minds entered the quarters of the next level. And they said, okay, it's time that you go through a womb process in order to have a functioning tool. You couldn't have a functioning tool. You'd get in the way had you had a functioning tool before, because you wouldn't have known how to use it. You understand that?
Mm-hmm.
But there are things to do, but you're limited before you get your body. You all remember a long time ago we talked about you all getting a spiritual body. We didn't have all the facts ourselves, but not a spiritual body, but a body from the next level. But we thought after a certain age you would get it, but we didn't know at the time that what you were doing was getting it. You know. Now the ones who dropped away will go back to the next level, just like we said, but they will not have their bodies.
And this doesn't mean they go back to the evolutionary gardens,
No.
because they've completed that process.
They are members. They're in cages. But they are not. They will be behind you all, because you all will have your bodies, and they will have to go through this process again.
To get bodies.
And it's just a beautiful process. If you think of
I think this is the reason we answered Rhodey's question the other day when he said, well, what happened to our next level bodies? And we said, well, how do you know that you aren't getting yours?
Mm-hmm.
You see, even though we didn't see this that clearly at that time, we said, what made you think you had one? Because you don't know what a next level body is.
Why are you concerned about that?
At least for a while, I was under the understanding that this was a special experiment that we were doing, but what you're saying is that every member of the next level had to go through the same process at one time or the other.
Yes, though, it might have been formed by a different lesson plan, just like Jesus' disciples had a different lesson plan. or at least all of those who, in the next level, needed vehicles for their purposes and had things to function where they would need this kind of vehicle.
Let me answer for you also. I mean, I'll add to what he said, because what he said was right, as far as I know. But you may not get a body automatic. I mean, you may not come and do this automatically. In other words, you may be a long time functioning, say, on a garden where an evolutionary garden, where the end result is spirit, a spirit that moves into the next level. But when you, let's say, if you get promoted and then the next, or move to another function, then you would have to go through this process.
When it's time for you to have
because there
shape and
been
form
that
like
many-
this. Like he said, you could have performed functions, other functions that they could have given you to do with just the blob of mind that you had prior to needing solidity, shape, function, that this will offer you.
And another thing that I wanted to say, and I haven't discussed this with you, but see if you think it's right.
Okay.
When Jesus was crucified, they put his body in the tomb, right?
Mm-hmm.
They did not find his body. So the only thing he did was go through the process of martyrdom. In other words, I wanted to say to you all not to worry about you having to kill your body before going to the next level, because chances are he was still in that body when they took it to the next level to disengage,
Separate from it.
separate the shell from the spirit.
That's the reason we said earlier that he hung on to it just long enough to impress his disciples to finish their task. And their task of gaining strength and gaining a glorified body, a spiritual body, a next level body, their task was to do it the way he had been the example for. And that's why he said, you have to do everything that I have done. And even when he came back to James a year and a half later, he said, you guys aren't getting with the program. You're just being too comfortable. You've got to start saying those things that will cause that negative to come to you, even to the process of having them end your life. And he knew in that society, or the next level knew in that society, that process would be, that they could watch over it and have that process be the birth canal for their next level bodies. But don't confuse this with thinking that this is what how your bodies would be disposed of. Our honest feeling is that you'll walk onto that spacecraft with the little shell on that you have on, and they'll skin you right there, and that'll be the end of that shell. And they probably, even as we thought earlier, will probably even learn things from that shell about it. We think that, in a sense, yours has been the harder one, because it's harder to take negatives and convert them, particularly from next level teachers in this way. It's really tougher than because you expect to take negatives from the humans when you know they're going to respond negatively. You prepare yourself for it. You're never prepared for negatives from us. You're never prepared for it. You think, boy, I'm so glad we at least got a decent experiment. When we walk in and say the meatballs are rotten. And what you feel at that moment is that secretion of that building chemical, and then you counter it, and which your counter then adds to it, and you're building that next level body.
Now, the other day on the tape, Bill said, you're getting too comfortable. You remember that on the tape? And in a sense, if you don't take advantage of the negativism that is given to you, then you are comfortable. If you block it out of your mind and don't get it really working in the right way,
right,
then you're just coasting is all. So what you want to do is really get in there and get rid of that resentment. Meditation gets rid of all that stuff that you have down inside of you you have blocked off. And what you want to do is spit it out and counteract every negative thing with a positive.
Well, thirst surfaces every time you say to yourself, I'm not growing fast enough. I'm not growing strong enough. If you're so thirsty, it will surface those things that will be negatives countered by positive. And coasting, like T said, you can coast if you don't really care that much about thirst. If your growth, if you're just pretty satisfied, and you're kind of staying back in the shadows because you don't want correction. Do you see what we're saying?
Right.
And we say, get out of the shadows, get to the forefront, get those ingredients, have that suffering, because that's what builds it. In other words, ask for growth as fast as you can ask for it. But then when it comes, don't let it scare you away. Just accept it as the necessary ingredient that you need, and then you counter it with necessary ingredient to change it over.
This is, to me, it's a fantastic understanding, even though we got it a long time ago, but we didn't have it.
Didn't have the
all
pieces
the
all in place.
together. And it sounds to me like it's the most stimulus that you have in getting your bodies built. And if you apply it, if you understand it, what we're saying, the next level has never given you this much.
It should seal the completion of your gestation, as far as I'm concerned.
It sounds like it's pretty close to the end.
Do you see what we're saying? Because if you can grasp what we're saying, and I knew it, I could never let enough negative build to threaten my completion. And I would invite lessons, even if they were hard to swallow. And I wouldn't let them continue to make me more discouraged. I would just recognize that those things that were labeled as discouragement were merely momentary excretions of a building ingredient.
It takes two kinds of ingredients to build a body. It takes the negative, and it takes the spirit positive. You can't have a goodness, just an ordinary goodness like you see in humans built from. It has to be the spirit mind that comes in, combined with the negative of the soul, to actually build the body.
Are you getting a picture of it so that you can?
I guess the picture has a lot to do with it.
Cadodian, check that again, please.
Does that mean that there was one disciple who was not martyred who possibly didn't get the next level?
Well, first of all, we don't know that he wasn't, and so don't concern yourself with it.
According to something we read, all of them were martyred.
We have read differing accounts. You're talking about John.
Yeah.
We've read the accounts that John wasn't. We've read accounts that John was.
So we don't know.
See, don't forget that the martyring was the lesson plan of this reaction of negative and positive, negative and positive. But that doesn't mean that martyring was the necessary ingredient for a next level vehicle. It just means that martyring was the process, a sustained suffering of encounters with negativity, and leaving your village, leaving your family, having everybody hating you, throwing you in prison without reason, going right on preaching, doing it in spite of everything, even to the point of being martyred. That didn't mean that if somebody didn't get martyred, they wouldn't get their vehicle. Let's say that because if John didn't get martyred, he certainly could have had sufficient suffering and negative countered by positive to have completed his task.
I thought maybe he had to stay longer and write a record.
We don't know.
He might just have one arm shorter than the other.
He might be a little taller, a little shorter. Who knows what he experienced? If it was equal to viability, that's all that counts. Let me check out
He
that
had
question.
something also. Giving the negative doesn't always come from weakness.
No.
Working with each other can bring out
Well,
the
and
negative.
your soul emanates the negative. Every time it tempts you with the human response, it's the negative. Check it.
I got a picture, and I don't know
like, let's say we get our body and we're in the next level, do we kind of, because we've got a form, is it like a house, becomes a house for more knowledge, or?
You're solid, and chances are the ones that you see wearing these space suits are members of the next level. You're a solid form, but chances are you, and if you were bumped into, they could feel you.
But you'd be a different structure than certainly a human, fallen condition.
All of us could see you and all, but you've got to remember something. You're always in the process of growing. Always in the process of learning.
This doesn't mean your form will be getting bigger the more you do.
No.
Any
Just
more than
grow
the copy.
that way.
See, we've said that the human vehicle is the copy. And in your form, probably in the same space of that form that would have been occupied by a human brain when you were in human form, would be where knowledge would build, and in your consciousness. Because you took, probably the chief uses this fallen condition as a fantastic machinery for building your development in the spiritual body.
Now, you all help us sometimes, but we're not asking you to do it. Because yesterday, my concern is always for you all. And whenever you all, let's take the snow tires, for instance, that disturbed me because I thought, learn something, or to help you to learn something and how to apply things and so on. Well, in the process of that, for overcoming the negative, this knowledge came in. And Doe was going through the
More
same
next level
time.
mind, more solidity.
And it came in just as easy as anything, easier than it ever has, because I feel like it's our bodies are getting built pretty good. Now, Doe also mentioned something that I don't know if we brought it up here, but when they talk about how Jesus gave up his body, to
Well, you know how they say, like in the scripture, and he said, I gave my body for you. Was he talking about his physical body? He was talking about his next level form and shape, which he sacrificed in order to do what he did, and he got it back in the process.
And so this is probably what we've had to do, because surely we have had our bodies. Now, the thing that's not the point I wanted to bring up, but the point I wanted to bring up is that I don't believe there are many I don't know, there might be quite a few, but it isn't recorded how many, because I can think of, who's funny, I can remember.
Marge?
No, I was thinking there hasn't been very many on this garden who have gotten their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are other gardens where they can get their bodies. We're just going through.
Where they can get their next level body.
Who had a question? You had a question? A minute ago, or does it
In other words, what you're saying is that they don't have to. The only way to get a body isn't on hell. Isn't in this jail. Huh?
This hell.
No, I'm saying, are you saying that the only way to get a next level body you don't necessarily have to go through this hell?
This hell, right. I think there are others.
But they're hell? Okay, but in other words, you still have to go through hell, which is still the laboring process. It's the laboring process. It's the painful process of suffering for such as the children of heaven. Somebody said that before. Live up.
So you were thinking that your bodies are close to being ready, so I wondered if you have some awareness of it, or if we will have any awareness of our spirit body, or not. I don't know.
The only thing that we're going by is usually when we get information that really affects our nervous system. I mean, it physically it affects us. Of course, it depends upon how strong the information is or how much it is that's coming in. And this time it didn't affect us either way. So it sounds to me like each time that we get information, it's less and less and less pain to our vehicle.
Can I add a little to that?
Sure.
Like, usually when we're getting a lesson, like T said, we experience a great deal of, we're even getting some potent ingredients which are forming next level minds. In other words, we experience a good deal of suffering in the process of getting that information. Now, even though T said that we had some suffering in regard to yesterday and the snow tire incident, when this was coming in, it wasn't nearly the kind of suffering that we normally experience. The suffering was coming in, but we dealt with it easily. If you can understand it, it's because as T and I were talking back and forth, and this information was coming in, there wasn't much of an upsetting process of getting it in, even though the process was trying to be upsetting, which to us is a very good sign, because it meant that we had grown enough to sustain it and to keep it in control enough to let it come on through. Can you understand that? Therefore, there wasn't much conflict. There wasn't much negativity born that needed to be countered. Do you follow what we're saying? And that to us is an indication that of getting closer and closer.
Of course, we don't know what
Now,
this is.
that doesn't mean that every time you have negativity come in as a lesson that you're a long way from liability. Doesn't mean that at all.
Can't judge it that way.
Lagodi?
If I remember right, you mentioned that you have to counter the negative with the positive in order to accomplish the catalyst and the building. Well, lots of times when our soul tries to bring up things of the past, I just block them out, but I don't counter them with a positive. I just say, I'm sorry.
No, that is blocking. I mean, that is positive. When you stop listening, now even if that soul tries for 4 hours and you're pounding to slam the door for 4 hours or for 3 days, you are countering with a positive. That is a positive. It doesn't mean you have to have a positive thought. It means you won the battle. It means that it wasn't even a fair battle because you won. Do you understand what we're saying? If a lot of damage was done in the process because you entertained a lot of negativity and you were very slow, it could mean that the recovery would be slower. Do you see what we're saying? But if you stayed strong during that whole period of battle, then you clearly won the battle, even though it might have been a very sustained battle.
Sometimes we have had old tapes come in, and it will just be keeping the tape shut off just completely depletes us.
That's right.
But see, we don't listen to the tapes, but we just stop it. It's just like saying, oh.
And you could even let that depletion make you go on a downer. But if you recognize it as depletion and say, oh, thank goodness, because you can feel that it's getting weaker, that what you're having to shut off is getting weaker.
And when you feel like you can't take any more, that's when it usually stops. And that means that ingredient has stopped coming in at that time, and you've accomplished. Then you have a few days of rest or a few hours of rest. But you want to welcome it now that you know that.
No, don't invite it. Just when it occurs, know that it's
figure out how you can get the positive back in its place, even though and then the negative will get stronger, because the negative is going to try to convince you that you can't find an answer that's positive.
And this is what builds you a more solid mind, because your defense becomes stronger.
You're building bones.
So that you really don't see it as stronger. You see, you don't see the negative as stronger, because you have become stronger to counter it. Hey, Rody has a question.
Earlier when you all were out talking about the meatballs and the chicken,
You weren't throwing it?
no, I just wanted, I suffered because, you know, it meant something to me for you to have to come out and give that lesson, even though I didn't prepare the meatballs or the chicken. I probably didn't suffer as much directly as the others who were getting the lesson directly. So does that mean I missed out on anything?
Well, I don't. It may not have been a moment for an ingredient for you, because if your suffering was in a human way, like I hate that Lynx had to have that and they didn't get to complete their meal, that really is so unimportant to us. We don't care. And we must admit it was aimed at those who were participants. And usually, like if you had something to do with buying the meat or in preparing the experiment, now I'm sure you were affected in a sense because you were on the crew and you could feel what was happening there. But the only reason I brought that up is because I don't want you to look at it in a human way and think, oh, you know, poor Lynx, they didn't get their HP, you know, because that doesn't matter to us one bit.
No.
And you don't want to suffer in human ways. That would be like giving in to a human emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But to feel bad because an experiment didn't come out right, is a
Yeah,
bad
that's
one.
what
That's right.
And you
That's
could
right.
have, and you could have come back with, well, next time, if I have anything to do with it, then I'm going to see if I can't help make it a good one.
Right,
a
we'll
better
know how to apply
And
this
that's
lesson.
applying it. But to take it and say, oh, well, we tried hard and there's no way we can see and go, then that's taking the negative
Right.
side. You see the difference? So in a sense, you did get some ingredients.
I'm glad you brought that up, and even though this may not have applied to you, of thinking about the human aspect of it, because we do not want you to get into human suffering. We do that is a negative, that is not a positive. It is when you are trying to do what's right, and it comes without your invitation, that negative feeling or that suffering, and you counter it. That's where growth comes. But don't invite suffering or slip into suffering. That's inviting a negative that you don't need to counter. They can slip right out of control.
If you are, we're using examples now, okay? If you feel like you are attracted to somebody, or you are trying to make yourself attractive to somebody, those are all negative.
Yes.
And at that time, you have to counteract that with a positive of I am not attracted to that, or I am not attracted. No matter what I do, I'm
above that kind of thing, and really move above that kind of thing
you see what
in your
saying?
consciousness.
If
That's
it
countering
isn't-
it.
If it isn't enters in your mind and you allow it to linger, then you've got to counteract it with the positive, because it is not a positive thing that will build a good body in your being. If you favor somebody, if you enjoy working with somebody more than somebody else, and you allow that feeling to linger with you, that is a negative, and it cannot.
And you can be blinded
it
to
cannot
it.
be put into your vehicle as a positive.
You've got to become keen enough to not be blinded to it. Because
Now, if you like working with everybody, there's nothing wrong with that.
no,
It's a positive.
that's right.
But if Dan Sodi walks into the lab and you have a reaction to him of I don't want to work with him, or I can't ever work with him, or something like that, whatever you have in your mind, or if you see
Or the
him and you
opposite.
say, oh, I'm glad I'm working with Dan Sodi today and not Liv Odie. You see what I'm saying? That is a negative.
Even though you're human, the humanness of your soul would have you think of it as a positive.
Brought to mind, say all these little different things that each of us has to deal with. If there's one area that I kind of hold back on, say I haven't totally overcome liking to work with somebody or other, and I work on other things, but this one I just let slide. Is that leaving a gap in my body?
That's right.
something
You
like
can't
that?
let it slide.
One sharp
Every little
You can't let anything slide. If you do, you're encouraging your own malformation.
And this is why we say you have to rid yourself. Once you rid yourself of all of these human characteristics, you will automatically build a right kind of body.
This doesn't mean that you can rid yourself in the sense of there not being there, but it means that you have learned the process of countering and overriding every one of those responses and keeping in control. In a sense, that's ridding because you're staying in control. Okay?
If you say if you have the feeling of I don't like to work with so-and-so, then what you want to do is counteract it by saying, I do like to work with so-and-so. I do like it. And believe it or not, it will become where you do like to
You can't
work.
switch over.
Remember how I used to say I didn't like to empty the bedpan? And so I got to where I said, oh, I love empty the bedpan. You know, and believe it or not, before I knew it, I didn't really mind it at all. And this
Not
is
that
a-
you really came to love it, but you came to at least
It
count it
wasn't
sufficient.
the
It didn't make
greatest
any
thing.
difference.
At
It
least
didn't
I
make any
wasn't
difference.
always busy when I needed to do it.
Does it kind of give us a better understanding of why, if you always release a feeling of goodness towards something that annoys you or bothers you, you get a good positive result out of it in the long run?
Sure.
As long as that's not a human response, like humans release love towards
No, it's like
all
that
negative.
paper that
you know.
That
said
phrase,
where.
thought the phrase blessing and
No.
that power of goodness paper that you gave us, it just occurred to me that this
In other words, you do it in the right way. You don't turn it around and say, if somebody is hitting you in the face, you don't turn it around and say, oh, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, just it can't be saccharine. It has to be sincere.
It has to be real, and you'll learn it, because how do you all get out of your downers? Do you wait until they wear off, or do you keep convincing yourself that I'm going to get above this, I'm not going to allow this to bother me? Well, this is the kind of stuff we're talking
That's applying the positive. Working against it. Working against it. Don't waste any time, even if it takes a long time. Your job is to, for that period of time, to work against it.
and the longer the time, the more you do it.
That's right. That's right. As long as you're working,
As long as you're working.
and not just letting it linger.
Now, something else that we discussed that we haven't brought up, and that is, all along we've taken you through so many different things. Like when you were intense, we would move you where you have to load up all those things, and then maybe you just move a few feet and then put it all back down again. All of those things, even so much as different diets that you had, either you needed those ingredients or you needed the test of not to carry. It doesn't really matter. It had to be something, because it took an awful lot of thought on and in trying to figure out what to give you to consume to, on our part, to be something that's just not insignificant other than the lesson behind it. And also, let's use the clothes circumstance, our taking you through the experience ourselves of buying the clothes and the reactions that you had. Maybe you didn't get to go. Maybe somebody else got to go, all the time, and
Or your vehicle liked
somebody-
something, but you kept it under control. All of that were tests of positive over negative.
negative, positive over negative. So if you can see all along how the next level has very carefully given you different ingredients so that you will have...
Like if you couldn't stand pink drinks, but you countered it, and it just didn't matter to you whether you had pink
got
drinks.
to where you needed
And then we came back and gave you roast beef sometime later, and you say, goodness alive, this is about as human as food gets, and that's a negative. And you countered it, and you said, this must be on the piano roll, and you've proven that it was, or you wouldn't have had the thought of, why roast beef? Do you see what we're saying? Everything that we have given you is to cover every instructions. We couldn't have framed it up, like Steve said many times, but it's like constantly we're doing something new that will challenge that's negative, so that you counter it with a positive and get that body built. Now there was something that came into my mind. Oh, I know what it is. For the sake of those who are listening to this tape back in Amarillo, I feel like sometimes we talk too much to these who are on the crew at retreat, exactly the same degree. If you are thirsty and you don't hide in the shadows, and you want these things surfaced because you want to grow as fast as you can grow, at your out-of-craft tasks and your in-craft tasks, and as you're coming to retreat and while you're here, everything that you do will happen just as fast as it happens to those who are at retreat. And don't forget that. But you have to desire it. It will still stimulate that negative being brought out through your from your soul's responses, as you encounter people on your out-of-craft tasks, as your soul tempts you in that way, and in your anything that you run into back there will happen just as fast as it happens here, as long as your desire for negativity being surfaced and desiring growth as quickly as you can have it. That's what's going to accelerate the viability.
Whenever you're constantly trying to program yourself, let's say I constantly tell myself if I get correction from the teachers, I'm not going to feel hurt or depressed about it. I'm just going to take it and go with it. Whenever I get correction, it may not hurt as long because of all my efforts to program it. That just means I have countered it quicker.
Well, you've prepared yourself for it, but it'll never, I don't think you could ever counter it enough for it to have no effect.
Right.
But the preparation you've done there, in a sense, has helped build a positive. It's like you've gotten a good, you've been working on a good bat, so that the next time the negative came, you'd have something good to hit it over the head with. And it hasn't been wasted. But you'll never get to the point that when a lesson is brought to you that you won't feel that. But from now on, you're going to even see those negatives as positives, because you are going, in other words, they're not going to be a negative to you. You have no excuse from this moment on to have a negative, because every negative that you feel, you will even recognize is for your sake.
That might be an indication that you've got your body's just about built too.
Just about Bible. We feel very, very encouraged about this note on the piano roll. Ready?
I was wondering if I was going to start glowing at my out-of-craft task.
Well, you might.
Well,
Speaking of your out-of-craft
we'll paint you black.
You get that high-protein glow? See that other This brings up something else to the ones of you who do have an out-of-craft task. You have the opportunity to get a lot of negativeness and a lot of positive replacing it if you try to go by what you have been taught in your out-of-craft task. So some of you who do have those out-of-craft tasks probably wanted them so badly, and that's why you have them, in order to make sure that you build your body right. And the next level knew it because they were the ones that helped you all find the jobs. So that
I think they still keep us informed just exactly on where your needs can best be taken care of, whether it's out-of-craft task, in-craft task. And we make those adjustments just exactly as we receive instructions. McGrody has
I think maybe you answered it when you talked to Arodi, but Kadoti, I think, brought up that like the length of time that you're dealing with it, you're still building, countering the negative. And let's say it takes somebody a day to finally accomplish countering the negative, where one person could do the same thing in 10 minutes by the strength of his effort. In other words, the length really doesn't have anything to do with it. It's accomplishing the task of countering the negative.
The only danger in thinking about that is that it could invite permissiveness and lingering. In other words, so all we can tell you is to get rid of it as quickly as you can get rid of it. If we say to you that the length doesn't really matter, then you could get in a danger point, because you could be so weakened by letting something linger and justifying it by saying, well, they said, it might linger a day or two, or I might have to work on it a day or two. And we say you should approach each one as if you can get rid of them immediately and not let the door open to permissiveness. or letting it linger.
Now, if you have a strong dose of negativism and you are working on getting rid of that negativism with positivism, then, and it may take you a day to do it, then there's nothing you're trying to overcome it. But I think if you wallow in it, if you don't try to counteract it with the positive, then that's wrong.
That's what we were talking about. And you've got to know the difference, because sometimes you can be wallowing in it thinking that you're trying to counter it. And you're not really applying that much effort to get rid of it. It's almost like that your soul and your vehicle loves some sensation. It hasn't had such sensation in so long, and it can kind of wallow in the sensation of that suffering.
Now, yesterday, when I was feeling badly, after a while I stopped thinking totally about all of it. And Doe and I were trying to work it out in our minds, and finally we said, let's don't talk about it anymore. But the feeling bad did not go away. But we didn't give in to it.
No, or show it on our faces, or
we kept busy
let it
trying to
interfere.
do things so we could not until we knew that we could get back to getting the positive working again. And it was really affecting us physically. And we have done it so much that we knew how to handle it. And I don't know that you all know how to handle it. But we also are aware that when this does happen, that it usually something's coming in. So a lot of times it's just sitting it out. And then whenever we get a little glimpse of the knowledge, then we start pulling it in as fast as we can.
But while we're sitting it out, we don't want anybody, even each other, to know that the other one is experiencing anything. We don't want it to show on our countenance. We don't want it to interfere with anything we're doing.
We try to do things that we think will get us past it
more quickly,
instead of doing things to make us worse. You see what
yes, like a lot of times, if you just if you get more active, if you can find something constructive that you need to do, it might help get your mind off of it. Because sometimes, even though you think you're applying a positive, you can be wallowing in it. So that's the reason we said we don't accept the long term. I think you had a question.
The impression I get is that if we get on board a spacecraft and we shed the vehicle, and the soul's going to go with it, so we won't have those impulses to deal with.
That's true. And that's in fact what we told you a long time ago. Can you remember that?
Yes.
We told you that long time ago. That it's been shed. The butterfly doesn't have the scales that the caterpillar shell to fool with any longer. It's a completely new thing. But your application has to be sufficient enough in order to be viable. So don't worry any about carrying any of this with you, because nobody's going to carry it with them. Even those who don't have a viable body, they're not going to carry it with them. They're going to have to do it over if they haven't seen it through
the ones who are back at the main craft. In a sense, everybody is watching out for each other. We're not there to see them get away with things. You see what I'm saying? In other words, your classmates are watching each other so that if they do something 3 times, they have a procedure to correct it. In other words, nobody can become so casual or into negativism without one of their classmates knowing it. If somebody goes on a downer, we usually hear about it. And the classmates...
which is wrong, because it means they're wallowing, or nobody would have even known what they had dealt with.
No, but the point I was getting at was that the system back at the main craft is good. And if somebody comes and brings something up to you, then don't take it as a negative, but take it as something that you need in order to put out some of the positive to build your body. So everybody back at the craft should be building a good body. with the system the way that we have it set up.
Yes.
We know you're building one, because we want to make sure that but we don't want the ones back at the craft to think that they're missing out on something, because they're not. Now, the ones who have dropped away, we've already said that we do not feel like they have a body. They've aborted, and therefore they would have to go and go through this again.
Now, just because we have told you this doesn't mean that the moment you step on a spacecraft that you have to start making demands about getting rid of your ship. If they choose for you to hang on for a little time, you just accept that as a positive too. And,
well, that's true. It might be that they will notice that you might need just a little something.
That's right.
That they can put you in a circumstance that will cause it.
Yeah.
And so.
But that would be nothing more than like putting the baby in the incubator to complete the process.
So that you should rejoice. Out of here.
But I just don't want anybody going on and say, well, I thought you were going to get rid of this permit right away.
Well, they wouldn't be in the right place. That's that last verse you're thinking of.
I think everybody's got questions. I'm going to stop that. Did I run into that?
I'm just not sure that I ever really understood what the answer was to the question that you asked at the beginning of what is your conscious mind?
Okay. Your conscious mind is what is emanated from your soul. That is the negative part of your conscious mind. The positive part of your conscious mind is your next level spirit. And it's important that you understand that, because things like temptations, old tapes, anything that the soul would bring into your any negative that comes into your consciousness has to either come as an emanation from the soul or some circumstance that you've been put in that has triggered that soul to have the same negative response that it would have if your vehicle touched something hot and triggers to the brain, into the conscious mind. In other words, your soul triggers negativity. Your vehicle triggers negativity into the soul, which then emanates into the brain. Like if a soul is programmed to like certain vehicles or dislike certain vehicles, then you're put into circumstance and that comes in your conscious mind, only because of that's the way the soul is programmed.
So it's just a meeting ground? Or battleground, or that's all it is between the two?
You don't forget that your conscious mind, when you shed the tool for birth, your conscious mind will be your spirit, your next level mind. Everything will be your conscious mind, because the negativity aspect of the conscious mind will not be a necessary tool anymore, because you've got the house, you've got the form, you've got the shape. Does that help? Now you're remembering it.
When T was talking about yesterday, and how you were having to deal with the problem you were dealing with, and you said to each other you just didn't want to talk about it anymore. Are you saying that what you do is you actually stop your thoughts at that time, just kind of listen to the silence in your head?
Oh, well, we think so.
Or think of
Yes, force constructive thinking. Force other things to think about that wouldn't be
even if it's
unanswered
nothing more
or
than
negative.
like a mantra or anything?
Oh, yes.
Sure.
If there's nothing more to do, then we'd think about anything. If it's counting the leaves on a tree.
I had a headache afterwards, and I worked on getting rid of that. But it's nothing bad. In other words, even though at the time we are suffering, we know that the end result is always good. But it's hard to believe it because of the negative side that is trying to come through to make us think that nothing good can come out of it. You know what I'm saying? But to keep the positive alive, we say, well, after this is over, well, what kind of information will we have? And in other words, we don't waller in it. We try to counteract it with it.
The only reason we sustained it as long as we sustained it is because we were pulling for an answer. And then when we recognized we weren't getting an answer, that we were just sustaining that asking and it was only bringing us pain and we weren't getting anywhere, then we said, goodness, we've worked at this long enough. Let's get on to something else where we can be positive. Now, one other thing about this conscious mind, remember how many times in the past we didn't even know what we meant when he would say, you've got to get your mind into your vehicle.
Yeah.
Because I think that your next level mind was almost like a blob outside your vehicle. And that we have forced it into your vehicle. We have forced you, the only way it could go was into your brain and come out as a consciousness. Do you see what? But we have forced it in, and we have usually forced it in by these experiences. But in the process of forcing it into the brain and coming out and having you build it in your consciousness, the shape is being formed. Do you follow that? The form and shape of your spiritual body, your next level tool, is being formed. Did that bring another one? Oh my God.
You've spoken of yourself, and I was thinking of Jesus when he did his test, that a part of your mind is down here manipulating the vehicle while the rest of you may be in a spacecraft. And I wondered if the mind that you had formed, it's just a part of it that is down here forming more or something.
I don't think the vehicle could take all of our mind.
No.
They wouldn't be able to survive, so I don't think that has changed. A next level mind has the ability to do a lot of things depending upon your experience. And
Your age
just
and
like
the next level.
the question Chakotay asked, what is your body made up of, knowledge or something like that? It's made up of experiences because you have many, many experiences. In dealing with the gardens and the work that the next level has. And every time, remember a long time ago we told you that as you get more experiences and the more things that you do, you develop a different kind of body altogether. Then our bodies may even be different than yours. If all of our mind could get into one body,
Well,
the next level body, then it ought to be different than yours in a certain way, but I don't know what way.
well, I don't know that when we have shed these vehicles that our next level minds couldn't house our whole
That's what I'm saying.
body.
There would be a change in ours. Maybe it's the color. Maybe we'll glow green.
Depending upon the age, there might be something different there. But just as a human brain can accommodate the mind of a very, very young person with very little knowledge and very little experience, it can also accommate an Einstein who, by human terms, has packed his brain with as much as anybody can pack it with. And we think that I may be mistaken, but that once we're shed of what he was saying is the vehicle that we're in, the human vehicle, couldn't house it. But the next level vehicle could easily house it.
Now this brings up something else. As you're working on the spacecraft, or when you get into the next level on the spacecraft, do you think that you're going to see a bunch of blobs floating around? You will see them according to what they were when they were before they graduated. In other words, they will have thought, and you will see them as individuals.
Wait a minute, who are you talking about?
Members of the next level.
But ones that have bodies, are you talking?
I'm talking about the ones who don't have bodies.
Well, see, I'm not clear.
Well, what I'm saying is what they emanate isn't a blob. They will be thinking individuals of the next level. You won't see them as blobs floating around because as they register in your mind, they will register to you as a certain individual. In other words, it won't even register that they're anything different from you. other than when they see you, they will register that, oh, you've already been through this experience of getting your body.
Well, I think most of what you would see would have bodies.
Right, but there
In other
will
words,
be
'cause
some who
any that you would see that didn't have bodies would be, as far as I can understand, unless we've got more to learn on this
No,
course.
what we said earlier was that there are some who graduate and they have certain tasks where they will stay in that same form for some time before they take on these bodies.
Mhm.
And these are the ones I'm talking about.
And we might see them.
You can see them
Uh-huh.
in the next level, but you will not see them as blobs.
Right.
You will see them as members of the next level. It won't register that way with you because it's close enough to the spirit body that you have that you won't see anything different. You put a human vehicle in there, you will see it will register as a human and be different.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like in Star Wars in the cantina, or wherever it was, each form that was in there probably was from a different area. But you let R2-D2 come in there, and they said, we won't serve you, because he registered as something different than these others. They all belonged, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
You see that? See what I'm saying?
I think, if I understand you right, what you're saying is that if there were some on the spacecraft who did not have next level bodies, that they would be, you wouldn't see them as blobs. They'd have something else that would register to you, like maybe they would be in a suit, but their form would not have yet solidified. They wouldn't, but they might be in a suit that would even identify them as someone who didn't have what you had gained, what you had had. But what he's trying to make you see is that you wouldn't see blobs floating around the spacecraft, thinking, well, those blobs haven't yet had
They're
their bodies.
insignificant because they are graduates. They are significant, but they will not register with you as blobs. They
Yes.
would be as the mind that graduated. In other words, you will communicate with the mind. You don't communicate with the vehicle. People
That's
sit
right.
down and look in your eyes and talk to you, and they look at the expression on your face to see if you understand what they're saying and so on. But in the next level, there's none of that. It's mental. It's a mental communication. You don't care what they look like, whether they're blobs. But the person that is a blob and they're looking at you, they know that you have gone through the process of this process.
But even if they didn't have a suit, he's saying you wouldn't see a blob. You would have a mental communication with an individual.
It is the mind that graduated, the spirit. The spirit that survived from the evolutionary garden, or whatever it's called. I don't know if spirit's the right word or not.
Well, that's one way we can talk about it.
But